You're fired. My own son, the boy I once helped build into a powerhouse, kicked me out, erasing every sacrifice I'd made. I left quietly that day, but not before taking one document that exposed his darkest secrets. When he finds out, Monday is going to be very interesting. The financial reports landed on Douglas's sleek glass desk with a soft thud that echoed across his 47th floor office. I watched his fingers pause above the keyboard, shoulders stiff beneath his perfectly tailored suit. Sunlight poured through the floor to ceiling windows, throwing sharp shadows across the minimalist space. Douglas, these numbers don't add up. The investors might. He didn't look up. Instead, he kept typing, each keystroke deliberate and dismissive. Dad, you don't understand modern business. He finally said, spinning his chair around. Your methods are 20 years outdated. I kept my face calm, but a cold weight settled in my chest. 40 years of building companies, surviving crashes, and navigating market chaos, all reduced to outdated methods by my own son. I was building companies when you were still. When I was what? Douglas shot to his feet, sending his coffee cup clattering across the desk. Dark liquid blurred over the quarterly projections, staining the pristine documents. When you were a child, I finished quietly. I'm not a child anymore, he snapped. And I don't need a babysitter. The coffee dripped steadily onto the marble floor, each drop counting the seconds of a relationship unraveling. Douglas turned his back to me, staring out at the steel, gray sweep of Lake Michigan. These projections show risk factors that could ruin everything I've built. He cut in without turning around. You see risk. I see opportunity. That's the difference between your generation and mine. The silence stretched, broken only by the distant hum of Chicago traffic and the soft drip of coffee. I gathered the stained papers with deliberate calm, sliding them into my briefcase. The young man who once stayed up late learning financial modeling from me had disappeared, replaced by a cold, ambitious executive who now saw his father as an obstacle. I'll review these with the compliance team, I said evenly. Do whatever you think is necessary, he replied, voice flat, dismissive. I left the office with measured steps, the hallway stretching ahead like a tunnel into a new reality. My son had just declared war. Later that afternoon, I sat in the boardroom, still replaying the argument. 3 board members shuffled through quarterly reports, chatting casually about market trends. When Douglas entered, his movements were too precise, too calculated. I've made a decision about management restructuring, he announced, his voice slicing through the room. Effective Monday, Columbus Grant will no longer be working with the company. The silence was deafening. Pens dropped. Eyes widened. Douglas, one board member whispered, but your father. My father will receive appropriate compensation. He interrupted coolly. This is a business decision. The words hit like physical blows. 20 years of sacrifice, of saving this company from bankruptcy, dismissed in a single sentence. Public humiliation, carefully staged for maximum impact. I rose slowly, keeping my dignity intact. I understand. I said, each word costing more than I cared to admit. Good luck to you, son. Douglas didn't flinch. He watched me leave, silent and unyielding. Back in my office, I found cardboard boxes already waiting. Proof that this had been planned long before today. I began packing family photos, awards, the milestones of a lifetime. My hands paused on a manila folder buried beneath quarterly reports. Inside were financial statements from 2008, when Grant FinTech had been drowning in debt. I remembered that night vividly. Douglas calling me in desperation, begging for a 20,000 lifeline. Eleanor and I had drained our retirement savings to save his dream. My money, my connections, my reputation had built the very empire he now controlled. Then I discovered something worse. At the bottom of a stuck drawer lay documents, marked with Douglas's initials. Internal financial summaries showed profits far higher than the official reports we'd filed. Growth projections were impossibly optimistic, debt obligations downplayed. Page after page revealed a pattern: profits inflated, liabilities hidden, investor presentations crafted to sell a fantasy. This wasn't creative accounting. It was fraud. I photographed everything: bank records, internal memos, annotated plans, evidence of systematic deception. Douglas wasn't just arrogant. He was breaking the law, risking prison, while courting millions in fraudulent investment. When I finally left the office, briefcase heavy with proof, Douglas appeared in the hallway. Neither of us had planned this final confrontation, but it felt inevitable. He eyed the box in my arms with a flicker of satisfaction. "Dade, security's locking the building in 5 minutes. And don't forget to return the company car keys. The Lexus needs to be in the garage by Monday." Even after 20 years of service, he wanted every last courtesy reclaimed. I tightened my grip on the briefcase, feeling the weight of the documents inside. Evidence that could destroy everything he thought he'd won. Douglas had started this game. Soon, he'd learn that his father still knew how to play. Douglas carried his files toward the executive wing, moving with the unshaken confidence of a man who believed he was untouchable, certain that his power protected him from any consequences. I watched him go, my thoughts sharpening like a blade. "Very well, son," I murmured under my breath, a quiet declaration of war. He disappeared around the corner, unaware that my apparent surrender was nothing but theater. His cruelty, especially that final jab about the car, had crossed a line I hadn't realized existed. As I headed for the elevators, I scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I needed. Gordon Hale, my lawyer, my old friend, someone who understood both corporate law and the bitter complexity of family betrayal. The phone felt heavy in my hand, carrying the weight of a choice that would change everything. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. Their polished steel reflected a face, no longer broken by humiliation, but hardened by resolve. I wasn't just a father cast aside anymore. I was Columbus Grant, a man holding evidence of criminal fraud, ready to show his son that respect isn't optional, and that consequences are not negotiable. By Monday morning, I walked into Gordon's law office, carrying the briefcase filled with the documents I had photographed. The space exuded old, world authority. Mahogany shelves lined with leather, bound law books, heavy wooden furniture, sunlight spilling across polished floors. It felt like the right place to begin. "Columbus, close the door and have a seat," Gordon said, his voice stripped of any friendly small talk. My late night call had already told him this was serious, though he didn't yet know the scale. I placed the photographs on his desk without a word. "Review these and tell me what options we have," I said. He adjusted his glasses and studied each page with the methodical precision that had earned him a reputation as one of Chicago's best corporate attorneys. His brow furrowed deeper with every document. The inflated profit margins, the falsified investor presentations, Douglas's handwritten notes outlining a strategy to deceive. "Columbus, these are serious," he finally said, his tone weighted with legal and moral gravity. "I worked in finance for 40 years," I replied. "I know fraud when I see it." The evidence spoke for itself: internal reports with one set of numbers, public SEC filings with another. Gordon Cross referenced the data against federal securities regulations, his computer screen filling with legal statutes and penalties. The pattern was unmistakable: systematic fraud. "This isn't a gray area," he said at last. "This is federal securities fraud. The SEC and the FBI will handle it. We need to file an anonymous whistleblower complaint. The penalties are severe: massive fines, prison time, permanent bans from corporate leadership." "What's the next step?" I asked, steady despite the storm inside me. "We'll file the complaint, preserve the evidence, and prepare for a federal investigation. You'll likely need to testify if charges are filed." Gordon secured the documents in his office safe. "Understand, Columbus," he added quietly. "Once the SEC acts, there's no turning back. This will destroy Douglas's career." I thought of Eleanor's worried face. I thought of the young man who once begged me for help late at night, and of the cold executive who had humiliated me days ago. I straightened my shoulders. "Schedule the meeting with the FBI," I said. "Some lessons can only be learned the hard way." 2 days later, I entered the federal building with the steady resolve of someone who knew there was no going back. Security checkpoints, metal detectors, and badge-wearing agents emphasized the gravity of what I was about to do. Agent Ramirez, a composed woman with years of experience in financial crime, led me into an interview room outfitted with recording equipment. "Mr. Grant," she began, "this interview will be recorded. You have the right to have your attorney present. You're here voluntarily to provide information about potential federal crimes." I nodded. The manila folder of evidence sat between us, bridging the gap between suspicion and undeniable proof. "These allegations are serious," she said. "I need you to walk me through exactly how you discovered this." "The documents tell the story," I replied, opening the folder. I explained everything. How I found the hidden reports, how the numbers didn't match, how my son planned to lure investors with lies. Ramirez photographed each page, carefully logging every piece of evidence. "We'll need time to verify all of this," she said after reviewing the files. "If the documents check out, Douglas Grant will face federal prosecution for securities fraud. Are you prepared to testify in court if this proceeds?" "I am," I said without hesitation. Family ties no longer outweighed the need for justice. I signed the formal witness statement, each stroke of the pen pushing me further from fatherly loyalty and closer to federal justice. When I walked out of the building, Agent Ramirez's business card in my pocket, the weight of what I'd done pressed down on me. There was no retreat now. My son had chosen deception over integrity. Justice would teach him the lesson I couldn't. The following Monday at dawn, I sat in my car across from Grant Fintech, watching unmarked federal vehicles glide into position around the gleaming glass tower we had once built together. Agent Ramirez had called the night before to confirm the warrants were signed, the arrest imminent. FBI agents in tactical gear emerged from black SUVs with quiet precision, their movements crisp and deliberate. The company that once symbolized our shared dreams was about to become the stage for my son's reckoning. A lesson in accountability that no boardroom power could escape. The sight of federal law enforcement preparing to arrest my son filled me with a complex mix of vindication and deep parental anguish I hadn't anticipated. Douglas's silver BMW pulled into the executive parking lot at 7:15 a.m., his usual punctuality working against him for once. He stepped out carrying files for a week of investor meetings, completely unaware that federal agents had already secured the building's entrances and elevator banks. Inside the lobby, agents moved with quiet precision, redirecting startled office workers as they maintained perimeter security around what was now a federal crime scene. Agent Ramirez stood calmly near the elevator bank as Douglas entered, his confident stride carrying him straight into the confrontation that would end his career. The operation unfolded with professional efficiency. No drama, no shouting, just the smooth execution of a legal warrant. Douglas Grant, you're under arrest for federal securities fraud, Ramirez announced clearly, flashing her credentials. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in federal court. This is a mistake. Call my lawyer immediately. Douglas's voice cracked in disbelief as the metallic snap of handcuffs cut through the marble lobby. The arrogant executive who had humiliated me barely 10 days earlier now stood powerless, facing federal charges built on the evidence I had provided. From across the street, I watched as agents escorted him out, his expensive suit and self-assured demeanor replaced by the grim reality of criminal prosecution. Media vans arrived quickly, cameras capturing the arrest of a prominent Chicago businessman. A cautionary tale about corporate greed and the reach of federal justice. 2 months later, I walked through the federal courthouse metal detectors for what would become the hardest day of my life. My footsteps echoed against the marble floors as I made my way to courtroom 415, where I would testify against my own son. Inside, dark wood paneling and the hushed formality of the courtroom made family ties feel insignificant beside the weight of justice. Douglas sat at the defendant's table in an orange prison jumpsuit, a stark contrast to the tailored suits he once favored. Eleanor sat behind me, dressed formally, but carrying the quiet devastation of a mother watching her family unravel. Please raise your right hand, the clerk instructed. The oath to tell the truth felt heavier than anything I'd ever done. Mr. Grant, how did you discover these documents? The prosecutor asked. I found them while packing my belongings after being terminated. I answered steadily, detailing how I uncovered the fraudulent investor presentations and fabricated profit reports. The defense tried to paint my actions as revenge. You sought to punish your son for firing you, didn't you? The attorney pressed. I protected investors from securities fraud, I replied firmly. Years of business experience helped me separate emotion from fact, personal pain from professional duty. Douglas stared at me with a mix of disbelief and betrayal as I delivered testimony that would seal his fate. Eleanor dabbed her eyes with tissues, grieving for both her son's choices and the price of my resolve. After 3 tense hours of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict. On all counts of securities fraud, conspiracy, and wire fraud, we find the defendant guilty, the foreman announced. Douglas's face crumpled as the words sank in. His attorney placed a steadying hand on his shoulder, while marshals prepared to escort him back to detention. Eleanor's quiet sobs filled the courtroom as she watched our son's downfall play out in full public view. The sentencing hearing weeks later carried a finality that even the trial hadn't. Douglas stood in shackles, thinner and stripped of the arrogance that had once defined him. Judge Morrison reviewed the reports with cool authority before pronouncing the sentence 7 years in federal prison, restitution of a $2.3 million to the defrauded investors, and the forfeiture of all remaining assets and corporate positions. The marshals led Douglas away without a backward glance. His wife left the courthouse immediately, refusing to answer reporters' questions about divorce proceedings and custody battles. The family I'd built over 42 years was now officially shattered. Driving past Douglas's former mansion later that day, I noticed a sold sign planted on the manicured lawn. His house, cars, and investments. Everything gained during his fraudulent success now belonged to the victims he deceived. That evening, Eleanor sat across from me at the kitchen table, exhaustion etched into her face. Was it worth losing him forever? She asked softly, her voice holding acceptance more than accusation. Justice has been served, I said, though the words felt hollow against the complexity of what we had endured. Meanwhile, Douglas adjusted to life in a federal prison cell, a narrow bed, a small desk, a toilet, and a roommate who listened to his bitter complaints about family betrayal. The corporate executive who once commanded boardrooms now stood in cafeteria lines and followed guards' orders, learning belated lessons about respect and consequences. His children were told they couldn't visit Daddy in his new home. Their mother, filing divorce papers with clinical precision, explained that Daddy had made terrible choices and would be away for a long time. News coverage eventually faded, but the business world remembered the Grant fintech scandal as a warning about unchecked ambition and family businesses gone wrong. My name surfaced in articles as the whistleblower, father who chose justice over loyalty. A title I never sought, but could not escape. At night, lying beside Eleanor as she finally slept in peace, I reflected on the path from humiliation to federal witness. Douglas's arrogance had cost him everything, but my decision had protected hundreds of innocent investors. The price of justice was steep, but some lessons can only be learned through consequences that no amount of wealth or charm can escape. The summer evening light streamed through our backyard as I set out chairs for a small gathering of friends who had stood by me. Eleanor moved between kitchen and patio with quiet purpose, the satisfaction of a woman who knew that, however painful, the truth had finally prevailed. Exonerated at last, I felt a calm sense of closure as string lights glowed softly between the tall oak trees, casting a warm, welcoming atmosphere that felt like normal life returning after months of federal hearings and painful family conflict. Citronella candles flickered gently, keeping the mosquitoes away, while their shadows danced across our modest, but carefully kept property in Oak Park. Gordon arrived with his wife, carrying champagne and wearing the satisfied smile of an attorney whose client had won complete vindication. Former colleagues who once doubted my accusations now offered firm handshakes and words of respect, their skepticism erased by federal court proceedings that confirmed every claim I had made. You saved hundreds of investors from losing their retirement savings, Gordon said proudly during his toast, raising his glass toward the evening sky. That took courage most people don't have. Eleanor stood beside me with quiet pride, her hand resting on my arm, as friends acknowledged the personal cost of my choice to cooperate with federal authorities. The same woman who once worried about spending our savings now celebrated her husband's decision to sacrifice family ties for the sake of principle. Justice had come late, but it had finally come. My response to Gordon's toast carried the weight of hard-won wisdom, the lessons of loss, sacrifice, and the heavy price of integrity within a family. As guests drifted away, Eleanor and I cleaned up side by side with the easy rhythm of a couple who had weathered a storm and emerged stronger. The evening marked the end of a painful chapter that began with professional humiliation and ended in moral victory. Later, we sat together beneath a sky filled with stars, reflecting on the journey from Douglas's corporate betrayal to his federal conviction. The cost had been staggering: a son lost, grandchildren estranged, family bonds shattered beyond repair. Yet the alternative would have been far worse. complicity in crimes that would have ruined hundreds of innocent investors. "I'm proud of you," Elena said softly, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had watched her husband choose integrity over convenience. "You did the right thing, no matter the cost." She was right. The truth had been worth every sacrifice. Douglas's fraudulent empire was built on lies that would have eventually collapsed, destroying countless lives. My actions not only protected those investors, but also taught my son a painful, lasting lesson that respect and honesty are not optional, even within a family. Federal prison would give Douglas 7 years to reflect on the difference between true achievement and criminal deception. Perhaps someday my grandchildren will understand that their grandfather chose justice over comfort, principle over silence. That night, under the quiet stars that had witnessed both our greatest triumph and deepest heartbreak, Elena and I found peace in knowing we had acted with integrity when it mattered most. If this story moved you, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. To hear the next story, simply click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.